What if a mysterious train showed up in your town while offering a free ride? No ticket, no visible driver, just a silent promise. Get in and never come back. A young reporter named Ethan Carter decides to investigate this train, but what he finds is far worse than any nightmare. That is the story of the Train of the Lost. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Tell us about your stories and where you're watching from. Ethan Carter had always chased stories that no one else dared to. Urban legends, whispered conspiracies, and strange disappearances. He lived for them. It was no surprise that when rumors spread about a mysterious train appearing in an abandoned station, he was the first to take notice. The town of Black Hollow had its share of ghost stories, but this one was different. There were reports, blurred security footage, vague witness testimonies, and an unsettling pattern. Every few months, just past midnight, a rusted locomotive would arrive at an old, out-of-use railway station. The passengers who boarded were never seen again. No bodies, no clues, just gone. Ethan's instincts screamed hoax, but deep down, he wanted it to be real. The thrill of the unknown was irresistible. Armed with his camera, a notepad, and a stubborn determination, he made his way to Black Hollow Station at 11:45 p.m., feeling the weight of silence pressing against him. The place was desolate, cold wind whistling through shattered windows, dust coating forgotten benches, and a heavy stillness that made his skin prickle. The platform was empty, no train, no passengers, only the occasional flickering light from the lone street lamp above. He checked his watch, 11:59. If the legends were true, the train would arrive any moment now. Then he heard it. A distant whistle echoed through the night, low and haunting. It sent a shiver crawling up his spine. Moments later, the ground trembled as the sound of grinding steel filled the air. Out of the darkness, an old-fashioned steam locomotive emerged from the void, its black iron exterior looking almost charred as if it had been through hell and back. It wasn't on any known railway. It had simply appeared. Ethan's breath hitched. His camera was rolling, his fingers gripping the cold metal tight. He should have run. He should have turned back. But something kept him rooted in place. The train's door slid open with a creak, revealing the interior bathed in an eerie golden glow. Inside, shadowy figures sat motionless in velvety seats, their faces unreadable. Then something moved. A man in an old conductor's uniform stepped out. His face was obscured by a deep black shadow where his features should have been. He extended a pale hand and without a word, gestured toward Ethan. Ethan's heart hammered. That's when he felt it. His hand instinctively dipped into his pocket. There, pressed against his fingers, was a small crumpled slip of paper. A ticket. A ticket he had never taken, never bought, never touched before this moment. Yet somehow it had appeared in his pocket, as if it had always been there. He slowly unfolded it, and his stomach clenched. Your journey is confirmed. Board now. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears as he stared at the ticket, his mind racing. He didn't buy it. He didn't bring it. But it was there, crisp and cold in his trembling hand. The conductor remained motionless, arms still outstretched in invitation. The air grew heavy as if the very atmosphere expected him to make a choice. This is insane. This can't be real. His journalist instincts wrestled with his survival instincts. He could turn back, walk away, forget all of this. But if he did, he would never know the truth. Gritting his teeth, Ethan took a deep breath and stepped onto the train. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the doors slammed shut behind him, sealing out the outside world. A deep, metallic clang reverberated through the train, rattling his bones. The lighting inside was warm, almost too warm, like the glow of an old sepia photograph. The decor was lavish, red velvet seats, polished brass fixtures, intricate golden engravings along the walls. It was a time capsule of a long-forgotten luxury. And yet, something was wrong. The passengers. Ethan swallowed hard as he scanned the silent figures occupying the seats. At first glance, they appeared normal. People of all ages dressed in different styles as if plucked from various decades. But as he focused, unease slithered down his spine. They weren't moving. Not even the smallest shift. No blinking, no rising and falling of their chests. They were utterly, impossibly still. It felt less like he was surrounded by people, and more like he was surrounded by lifelike mannequins. A chill crawled over his skin. He took another hesitant step forward, the carpet swallowing the sound of his footsteps. Then, one of them turned its head. The motion was unnatural, as if it had been forced by invisible hands creaking like old wood bending under pressure. A woman in a tattered floral dress locked eyes with him, and her lips parted just slightly, her expression frozen in something between terror and a silent scream. Ethan's throat closed. The train lurched forward. He stumbled, grabbing onto a brass handrail as the world outside the window changed. There was no city, no Black Hollow station. Outside the window was only darkness. Thick, endless, devouring darkness, with fleeting shapes moving inside it. Panic clawed at his ribs. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice crackled over the intercom, a voice deep, distorted, laced with something inhuman. "Our journey has begun. Please remain seated. This is a one-way trip." A new sound filled the air, faint at first. A slow, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from further down the train, like footsteps, like someone or something was walking toward him. The tapping grew louder, steady, unhurried. Ethan's breath hitched as he turned toward the source of the sound. At the far end of the car, past the frozen passengers, something moved. A shadowed figure, tall and unnaturally thin, was strolling toward him with an almost playful grace. The flickering lights distorted its features. Long limbs, elongated fingers that seemed to stretch a little too far when they swayed. Ethan clenched his fists, willing himself to stay calm. His gut screamed at him to run, hide, do something, but where? He was trapped in a moving coffin, surrounded by these still, empty-eyed passengers, and a void of endless dark outside the windows. The thing kept moving, its presence warping the space around it. The closer it got, the harder it was to breathe. Ethan took a shaky step backward, and a cold hand clamped around his wrist. He choked back a scream as he whirled around. One of the passengers, a frail-looking man in a moth-eaten suit, was no longer motionless. His fingers dug into Ethan's arm, his pupils blown wide with sheer terror. His lips barely moved as he rasped, "Don't move. It won't see you if you don't move." The air in the train car thickened. The thing was closer now. Ethan felt it before he saw it. A pressure, wrong and unnatural, pressing against his skull as if invisible hands were reaching inside his mind and peeling back his thoughts. Then, it spoke. Or rather, it echoed. In a chorus of distorted voices, as if it had stolen words from 1,000 people before him. Ethan Carter. His own name. His legs nearly gave out. The man gripping his wrist let out a strangled sob, his grip tightening like a vice. "Don't move," the man begged again, his voice cracking. "It only takes those who run." Ethan didn't dare breathe. The shadow lingered, hovering just beyond the rows of passengers. It twisted its head in that unnatural way, jerky, insect-like, sniffing the air as if searching for something. "It knows, I don't belong here." A long, brittle-fingered hand reached out, dragging slowly along the armrest of the seats just inches from Ethan's chest. The dim golden glow of the train flickered violently, warping the shadow's shape, making it coil and ripple like living ink. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, it vanished. The lights stabilized, the pressure lifted, the thing melted into the next car as if it had never been there. Silence stretched thick and suffocating. Ethan let out the breath he didn't realize he was holding. The man's grip on his wrist loosened. Tears streamed down his gaunt face. "I'm sorry," he whispered hoarsely. "It doesn't matter. It's already chosen you." A sick dread filled Ethan's stomach. The train whistle howled, and the doors leading to the next car creaked open on their own, as if inviting him forward, as if the nightmare had only just begun. Ethan stood frozen, his skin crawling as the doors to the next car gaped open, revealing nothing but pitch-black emptiness beyond. He could hear it. A distant wailing, soft at first, like the wind through broken glass. But the longer he listened, the clearer it became. Voices, whispers layering over screams, crying, pleading. He turned to the man who had warned him before. "Where does that door lead?" The man only shook his head, horrified. "The station," he murmured, "where they keep the ones who don't belong." Ethan's pulse thudded. He felt the train slow. Through the window, the impossible darkness outside started shifting, transforming. Murky silhouettes took shape. Columns, rusted tracks, cracked concrete. An ancient railway station loomed outside. It looked abandoned, as if no living soul had set foot there in centuries. Vines curled around decayed metal benches, and the clock above the main terminal was shattered, its hands frozen at a time that didn't exist. A corroded sign hung above the exit. Terminus Station. The train screeched to a full stop. The doors shuttered open completely. And then, they came. From the abyss outside, figures stumbled forward. At first they looked human. People in tattered clothing moving sluggishly. But as they entered the train, the golden light revealed them for what they truly were. Ethan's stomach clenched. Their faces were wrong. Eyes empty voids, hollow and bleeding black tears. Their mouths hung slightly agape, as if trapped mid-scream. Their hands twitched with spasms of desperate longing. One by one, they filled the empty seats. They were the lost, the damned prisoners of the train, bound to ride its endless loop until they forgot who they once were. Ethan felt sick. The train shuddered, its whistle wailing like a funeral song. The deadened figures sat unmoving, and yet he swore he could feel their empty sockets locked onto him. "You have to get off," the frail man whispered. Ethan snapped his gaze back to him. "If you're going to escape, this is your only chance." Ethan's breath hitched. Escape? Someone did it before. The man's grip on his sleeve trembled. A long time ago. I don't know how, but they made it. If you don't leave now, you'll... A deafening screech. A force ripped the man backward. His body was yanked into the dark of the next car, his mouth stretching in a soundless scream. Ethan barely had time to react before something lunged at him. Cold, bony fingers snatched his arm, one of the damned gripping him too tightly. Others turned, their empty sockets burning with unreadable intent. They weren't passengers anymore, they were hunters. The doors started to close. The station outside was dark, crumbling, wrong, but it wasn't the train. His mind screamed with one last chance to decide. Jump, or stay. And then, without thinking, he ran. Ethan leapt through the closing doors, crashing onto the crumbling platform, just as the train roared back to life. He rolled onto his back, gasping, as he watched the monstrous locomotive grind against the tracks, blurring into the abyss as it vanished into nowhere, silence. He had escaped the train, but when he turned to look behind him, he realized he was not alone. Dozens of shadowy figures stood on the platform, watching, waiting, and a sickening voice whispered from the darkness of the station, "You shouldn't have left." Ethan's breath came in shallow gasps as he stared at the shadowy figures surrounding him. Their silhouettes flickered in the dim, dying light of the ancient terminus station. Tall, hollowed-out shapes, their heads twitching unnaturally as if struggling to stay upright. And then they moved, not like people, like smoke caught in the wind, shifting, twisting, drawing closer. "You shouldn't have left." The voice came from everywhere, an echo in his skull rather than something spoken aloud. Low, sickly sweet, amused. Ethan took a slow step back. The station stretched farther than it should. The more he tried to make sense of it, the more it changed. Corridors that hadn't been there before stretched into infinite darkness. Signs blinked in and out of existence. Even the clock, its shattered hands, began to tick backward. A trap. This place wasn't salvation. It was something worse. I was never meant to leave that train. The figures crept closer, He could hear whispers rising, voices layering together like a sick chorus. Turn back. Go home. Stay. Panic clawed at his mind. He scanned the platform for anything, a door, an exit, a way out. But there was only the station stretching into the void. And then, he saw it. A figure in the distance, not a shadow, not one of them. A man. Dressed in tattered clothes, slumped against a rusted bench. Ethan's heart lurched. Something about him felt different. The man lifted his head. Tired, haunted eyes met his. "You escaped." The man's voice was rough, fragile from years of silence. Ethan didn't hesitate. He ran to him. The man flinched, as if unaccustomed to movement, but didn't stop Ethan from gripping his arms. "How do I leave?" he demanded. "There has to be a way out." The man studied him, blinking slowly. "No one escapes." Ethan's stomach dropped. "No," he whispered. "Someone did. Someone got out. You have to know." The man's eyes flickered, just slightly. A glint of something buried deep. "There's one way," he rasped. Ethan leaned in. "Tell me." The man exhaled, his entire frame trembling. "The train always returns." A beat of silence. Then behind them, the station lights flickered violently. The whistle screamed, and with a roar of grinding steel, the black locomotive reappeared on the tracks. The figures turned, all of them, their heads snapping toward the train, their hollow sockets widening. The train doors slid open, an invitation, a demand. Ethan's veins turned to ice. The train was back for him. The man beside him grabbed his wrist. His grip was weak, desperate. "You have to get back on," he gasped. "You never should have left." The shadows closed in. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. He could see them waiting inside the train. Those frozen passengers sitting silently like before. Except this time, they weren't still. They turned their heads, watching him, expecting him. The station itself seemed to collapse inward, the shadows consuming everything. He had no more choices, no more time. He ran. His feet pounded against the broken platform. His legs burned. The whispering became screams. Ethan threw himself forward and leapt back onto the train. The moment his foot touched the floor, the doors slammed shut. A shockwave rattled through the entire car as the train tore away from the station, dissolving it into black mist. Ethan hit the ground hard. His head spun, chest rising and falling in ragged gasps. The golden light flickered, settling once again into that familiar, unnatural warmth. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up and froze. Every single passenger was staring at him. Their lifeless faces turned in unison, watching as if they had been waiting. The intercom crackled to life. That same distorted voice, deep and void of emotion, filled the train. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter." Ethan's body went cold. The realization hit him all at once. He hadn't escaped. He had just become part of the ride. The train roared forward into the abyss, its whistle piercing the void. And Ethan understood. This was never just a journey. This was forever. Now tell me, what if this train passed through your city? Would you get on? Comment here. Do you think Ethan could have escaped any other way? Or was he doomed from the beginning? If you like this story, share it with your friends and see if they would have the courage to board the train of the lost. And of course, don't forget to follow for more terrifying stories like this. After all, who knows what the next stop will be?